Hey everyone, tonight we are going to explore the forsaken halls of Lakenheath Asylum, where every creaking door and wavering shadow harbors a story best left untold. So, before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now, lie back and relax as we begin this journey together tonight. The world outside had fallen silent by the time I pulled up to the rusting gates of Lakenheath Asylum. Midnight, the moment the clock in my car dashboard glowed 12 Vaziyuzra, I felt a chill braid itself through my spine. Overgrown ivy strangled the iron bars, and beyond them, the asylum's stone facade loomed like a slumbering beast. My breath caught in my throat, part anticipation, part dread, as I stepped onto the cracked pavement. A wind whispered through the empty courtyard, carrying scraps of age-old laughter and anguished sobs I could almost hear. As though the building exhaled its trapped memories into the night, I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark corridor ahead. The heavy gates sighed shut behind me, their clang a verdict. You are here now, and there is no turning back. Every nerve in my body pulsed with the asylum's latent energy. My journal lay tucked under my arm, its empty pages waiting to record the horrors I sensed, but could not yet name. I forced myself onward, the narrow path, winding between leaf-choked gardens and toppled statues of forgotten benefactors. Some had broken off at the neck, others buried face down in the cracked soil moss creeping over fractured marble. The main entrance doors gaped open as if carved by some unseen hand. Pushing one massive door inward, I was met by a gust of stale air so cold it felt as though the building exhaled its own rot. My flashlight's weak circle of light danced across the foyer, a decaying reception desk strewn with yellowed papers, a shattered chandelier hanging perilously from the ceiling. And though at the end of a long hallway, a solitary ward nurse's station with half its drawer drawers ripped out. I could almost hear the echo of shoes on linoleum, the scratch of pen on paper, the low murmur of frightened voices. But in this instant, there was only silence, an absence so profound it pressed against my eardrums. Footsteps mine resonated each strike loud enough to wake the dead. My heart hammered in my chest as I advanced, drawn by a compulsion I could neither rationalize nor resist. Somewhere in this labyrinth of peeling walls lay the truth behind Lakenheath's darkest chapters, the disappearances, the mad experiments, the whispers of rituals conducted by the asylum's long-gone head doctor. A sudden drip of water, somewhere to my left, snapped me from my spiraling thoughts. The beam of my flashlight hovered over a damp stain spreading down the wall, deep crimson in the sliver of light. I swallowed hard. Was it rust, old paint, or something else? My stomach twisted. I thought of turning back, of abandoning this foolish curiosity, but my feet would not obey. Instead, I pressed forward into the yawning corridor, the beam riffling across cracked tiles and faded signage whose letters peeled like dead skin. The asylum breathed around me, each exhalation setting the hairs on my neck on end. I rounded a corner and froze. At the entrance to Ward C stood an ancient clock, its hands frozen at midnight, its face cracked in a web of fractures. Beneath it, a plaque read simply, "The Children's Ward." My light flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw tiny silhouettes dart across the far end of the hallway, small bodies flitting behind decaying doors. I blinked, and they were gone. Only the thud of my heart and the relentless drip of unseen water accompanied me as I crossed the threshold and into the asylum's true entrails. The corridor beyond Ward C stretched before me like a mouth yawning into darkness. My flashlight trembled in my hand, its beam wavering against damp walls, streaked with mildew and the faint imprint of long-dried blood. Each footfall echoed, then folded into a hush so complete it felt alive. The air smelled of rot and old plaster, and somewhere overhead a loose ceiling tile shifted as if something had just brushed against it. I forced myself forward, heart-thrumming, drawn by the faint promise of discovery and the primal fear that I was trespassing in a place that refused to be known. A wall-mounted sconce clung to life, its flickering bulb sputtering with a dull orange glow. It cast ragged shadows that danced like grotesque phantoms along the corridor's length. At the far end, two more lights pulsed in and out of existence, ghosts of illumination that teased me forward. I passed peeling signage, occupational therapy, electroconvulsive suite nursery, each word revealing fragments of broken lives. My light grazed the inside of a door frame where claw marks gouged into the wood as though something had tried to claw its way free. I paused, breath hitching, as a low murmur drifted from my left. Not quite human voices, more like an undercurrent of static, as though dozens of people spoke at once, each voice barely intelligible. My pulse spiked. I swept my beam toward the source, a partially open door marked Patient Lounge. Inside, a cluster of chairs lay in disarray, upholstery torn to shreds, springs coiled like skeletal ribs. The voices rose in awareness, forming half words. Eliza, Marcus, don't let him, before dissolving back into unintelligible sighs. Goosebumps rippled across my arms. I stepped in, and the door slammed shut behind me. My heart lurched. I froze hand on the handle, and after what felt like an eternity of silence, I tried the door. It swung open at the first touch. Outside, the corridor had shifted. It divided into two hallways, one descending into obscurity, the other rising toward what I thought must be the second floor. My memory told me there had been only one path. My breath caught, and I fought the urge to turn back. The whispering voices trailed me, growing louder as they split into two streams, one from each corridor. Faint laughter chimed from below. Distant sobs echoed from above. I chose the descending hall, compelled by the heavier darkness. The floorboards moaned underfoot, their protest muffled by layers of dust. A stale breeze ruffled my hair, carrying the faintest hint of something metallic. My flashlight beam caught an overturned walker. Its rusted frame splayed in the center like a grotesque spider. Scrawled across the wall in charcoal, no doubt by a former patient, were the words, "He watches us." I swallowed, every muscle coiling. Who was he? The memory of that locked plaque reading the children's ward flared in my mind. Something malevolent lingered here, a presence older than the asylum's brick. A sudden flash of the overhead light plunged me into full illumination for a heartbeat, then died, hurling me into pitch black. My flashlight flickered wildly before stabilizing. In that flurry of darkness, I caught two shapes at the edge of the beam silhouettes that darted behind a doorway. I lunged forward. "Hello," I called, only to find the door led to an empty utility closet. Inside, nothing but broken mops and steel buckets. The whispers, however, intensified, spinning around me in a dizzying swirl of half-formed phrases. I backed out, fumbling for my courage, stumbling back into the corridor, and the door slammed shut on its own. Swallowing a scream, I found a second door marked Ward D and wrenched it open. Inside, hospital beds lay toppled, sheetless mattresses stained in grotesque patterns. The whispers here coalesced into a child's voice, high-pitched and plaintive. "Mama, please, don't leave me." My chest contracted. I shone my light across the room, revealing nothing but an empty bed, rocking back and forth as if someone unseen had just vacated it. I approached breath shallow and noticed tiny footprints in the dust toy-sized boots leading toward a wall of peeling wallpaper. I knelt and traced the tracks. They led straight through the wall. My flashlight showed the plaster beneath had a hairline fracture, as if a passage lay hidden behind. I pressed my shoulder against the wall. It shifted inwards. With trembling fingers, I pushed until a section gave way, revealing a narrow gap. Beyond, darkness beckoned. The corridor's whispers rushed in, urging me to enter. My rational mind screamed to retreat, to return to the foyer and lock myself in my car. But curiosity outweighed fear. I squeezed through the gap, feeling the plaster scrape against my jacket, and emerged into a second corridor, one I had not seen on any map or blueprint. This hall was colder, the air growing damp and heavy. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, each plink-plonk sounding like a Morse code of dread. The flickering lights here were erratic. Some stuttered on and off in rapid succession. Others glowed steadily, but dim, casting long shadows that crept along the walls. Across the hall, a door labeled hydrotherapy stood slightly ajar. The smell of chlorine stung my nostrils. Inside, I peered at an old therapy pool. Its water murky with age, the tile floor barely visible beneath a layer of slime. On one wall, medallions of rust dotted the surface in a disturbing pattern, as though someone had pressed their hands repeatedly against it. I heard my name, my full name whispered so close I thought it came from my own lips. My flashlight swung wildly. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling, and smashed into a cabinet. A file folder tumbled out, flipping open on the floor. Patient names, dates, handwritten notes signed in the doctor's looping script. The last entry read, Subject 149. Exhibits, psychokinetic resonance. Termination scheduled. My stomach nodded. I didn't want to know what psychokinetic resonance meant. I shoved the folder away, heart pounding, and turned to leave, only to find the door had closed behind me, sealing me inside the pool room. The whispers swelled, chanting a name I recognized from the file. Subject 149. Subject 149. The lights flickered out entirely, plunging me into star-like darkness. My flashlight trembled against the floor, its beam sweeping in jagged arcs. The chanting grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of voices, overlapping, children crying, men screaming, women begging for mercy. I slapped at the door release switch, but nothing happened. A cold spray of water hit my face, dripping from the ceiling directly overhead. Then a single drop fell into the pool, and the water rippled as if something massive had just stirred inside. I yanked at the door handle frantically, until it popped open. I tumbled out into the corridor, gasping. The chanting ceased. Silence reclaimed the hall, thick and suffocating. My jacket clung to my skin, weighed down by water. I forced my legs to move, compelled by an urgent instinct for survival. The corridor narrowed, and the flickering lights grew fainter. A distant door slammed shut, and I spun, shining my light back toward the pool room. The door hung slightly off its hinges, as if whatever was inside had slipped out. Shaking, I pushed onward, leaving behind the hydrotherapy wing and the voices therein. Every step felt like a betrayal, like I was fleeing ancestors who had summoned me for judgment. The corridor opened onto a wide intersection where a grand staircase once stood, now missing its steps, revealing a gaping void. Above, a single emergency lamp sputtered its red glow, throbbing like a dying heartbeat. I realized with a jolt that the corridor I had entered here was the one I'd originally bypassed when I first crossed from the foyer. Time and space seemed to tangle, sewing me into the asylum's web. I swallowed hard and kept walking, whispering a silent promise I would see this through. I would find the source of these voices and the truth behind their torment. But as the corridor stretched before me, consumed by shadow, I felt an unshakable certainty that something had already found me. A low groan of metal reached my ears as I approached the massive ward door at the corridor's end. Its iron bars were thick welded shut long ago, and the lock looked as ancient as the asylum itself. The beam of my flashlight danced across the rusted surface, revealing pitted metal and jagged scars, deep grooves where something or someone had tried to escape. I placed my palm against the cold iron and shuddered. A tremor passed through it, as if the door itself exhaled in warning. My journal, still empty of real answers, felt suddenly too thin to bear the weight of what I might find inside. I scanned the hallway behind me, dim lights flickering a distant moan, drifting on the stale air. I drew in a steadying breath and ducked under the lowest bar flashlight clenched between my teeth. Once inside, I shook the door's handle. It didn't budge. Heart pounding, I dropped to my knees and pried at the lock with the blade of my pocket knife. The metal screamed in protest, but after several minutes of forcing twisting and cursing under my breath, there was a final resounding snap. The lock fell away, clattering onto the concrete floor. My pulse drummed painfully as I slid the door open, the hinges screaming like tortured souls. A gust of frigid air surged past me, carrying the scent of moldy mattresses and something far fouler, an acidic tang that reminded me of dried blood. I hesitated at the threshold. The ward beyond lay in chaotic disarray, lit by the weak bluish glow of my flashlight. Beneath it, long-forgotten beds, crumpled under rotting mattresses, their metal frames contorted in unnatural angles. Stepping in, I wove between the remnants of human habitation. Rusted IV stands lay collapsed on the ground wires, spilling across floor tiles, cracked by years of neglect. I clicked my flashlight upward and was met with a ceiling half-collapsed jagged boards, exposing the dripping pipes above. Every drip echoed through the vast chamber like a ticking clock. I sucked in a breath that turned to mist, the air so cold it burned my lungs. I crossed to the ward's far corner, where a line of beds had once stood sentinel. Rust had eaten through several frames, leaving jagged edges. The mattresses, reduced to dusty husks, bore stains that were darker than mere age splotches, the color of congealed iron. I knelt beside the nearest bed and ran a finger through the worst of it. It smeared under my fingertips, sticky and thick. My stomach rolled. I wiped my finger on my jeans, unwilling to look too closely. Beneath the mattress, I spotted something half buried in dust. A small porcelain doll, one glass eye missing, and its mouth cracked in an eternal cry. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The remaining eye stared sightlessly up at me, and in its depth, I thought I saw a flicker, no more than a trick of light of movement. My throat closed. I set the doll back down and scanned the ward for an exit. There was only the way I entered. A subtle shift in the atmosphere made the hairs on my arms bristle. The stench of decay grew stronger, and I thought I heard something sliding across the floor behind me. I spun around, flashlight whirring to life, and caught a glimpse of a dark shape vanishing under another bed. My breath stuttered. "Hello," I called, voice cracking. Silence answered, followed by that metallic groan again, as though the door I'd secured, still on its hinges, trembled in response. I edged toward the spot where the shape had disappeared, careful not to make too much noise. My beam swept beneath each bed. Under the last one, an arm-thick pipe jutted from the wall, its surface slick with something dark. I glanced up at the scratched message smeared in charcoal above it. "Do not awaken him." The words seemed to pulse with a whispered threat. A sudden rumble shook the ward. Dust rained from the collapsed ceiling above me, and I stumbled backward. My flashlight flickered wildly, casting frantic shadows that surged across the walls. A distant clatter once-twice echoed from the far end of the room. My heart leapt into my throat. The clatter came again, closer this time, like metal dragging across concrete. I forced my shaking legs to carry me toward the exit, but the bars at my back blurred in my peripheral vision. An ice-cold dread pooled at the base of my skull. I needed to escape, but something told me I wasn't alone. I dared not look behind. Instead, I sprinted toward the doorway. My flashlight's beam swung madly, illuminating the warped lock I'd broken, and the bar cracked where I'd squeezed in. As I reached it, the dragging sound exploded into a violent screech. My breath hitched, and I yanked at the door. It refused to budge. Panic pried at rational thought. I rammed my shoulder into the door, again and again. With each blow, the dragging sound grew louder, angrier, like nails being pulled across iron. My shoulders slammed against the cold metal until my breath came in ragged gasps. A sudden shift, a subtle give made me freeze. The dragging stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even my racing heart seemed drowned out. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, something new met my gaze. A dark smudge on the floor, inches from the threshold. It was deep red, almost black, pulsing with a subtle sheen. I swallowed hard, realizing it wasn't paint or rust. I reached for my journal, fumbling with the pen cap, and knelt beside the stain. Before I could place a single word on paper, the darkness in the room coalesced, pulling the stain inward, vanishing like ink in water. A cold presence brushed my shoulder. I snapped my flashlight toward the corner where the doll had been. It wasn't there. A soft creak echoed directly behind me. I dared to glance over my shoulder and froze. A figure crouched at the threshold, tall, gaunt limbs, unnaturally long, wearing the tattered remains of a patient's gown. Its face was a pale void, save for two hollow sockets that glowed faintly red. It tilted its head at me as though curious, before rising to its full, impossible height. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. The figure advanced, dragging one foot with a slow, deliberate slowness. It made no sound except the scrape of shoe against tile. My mind screamed for action. I drew my flashlight back like a weapon and shone it into the creature's face. Its red eyes flared, and with a guttural hiss, it lunged forward, slammed my shoulder into the bars again. The door shuddered, but held. I flung myself backward, tumbling onto the floor as the creature's hand reached for me. Its fingertips brushed my ankle, cold as gravestone, and I kicked out. My heel connected with what I prayed was its shin, and a metallic clang vibrated through the room. The creature recoiled more in surprise than pain. Seizing my chance, I bolted backward, flashlight bouncing wildly until I hit the far wall. My heart pounded so fiercely, I thought it might burst free of my chest. Above me, I saw an old emergency exit hatch. In the ceiling, a small ladder coiled beside it. Without hesitation, I threw myself against the wall to brace for the climb. I grabbed the ladder fingers, slipping on rusty rungs, and hauled myself upward. The creature's shriek followed me as I climbed, the sound of metal ripping, of unblinking red eyes, burning with malice. My hands found the hatch handle. With one last surge, I wrenched it open and clambered into the void above. The creature's fingers brushed my coat collar, and I felt a sharp pull before I kicked off its hand and tumbled through the hatch. I landed in a narrow ventilation shaft, the cold metal biting into my palms as I crawled away. Its screech echoed below, distant but still full of hunger. I pressed my flashlight against my chest, breathing hard as the barred ward closed beneath me. The gothic outline of that empty-eyed thing lingered behind the iron door. My notebook lay open beside me, ready to record the unspeakable truth I'd uncovered. I needed to keep going. Lakenheath's dark heart had revealed itself, but I was far from safe. I crawled forward, leaving the sealed ward and its monstrous guardian behind. A metallic taste lingered in my mouth as I crawled through the ventilation shaft, the narrow tunnel rattling with each tremor of the building. My chest heaved and sweat gleamed on my brow despite the chill. When the shaft ended above a heavy plaster ceiling, I pushed upward and felt the relief of solid ground beneath my feet. I pried open a maintenance panel and stepped into a dimly lit side room. My flashlight beam flickered across the chipped paint and exposed wiring before settling on something far more unsettling. An ornately carved door, its surface warped by rot, but still bearing the emblem of Lakenheath's original crest. A griffin clutching a serpent. Heart pounding, I pressed my hand to the door. It swung open silently, revealing a circular chamber lined with tall wooden panels. Each panel held a portrait in a dust-coated frame, the glass warped and smoky with age. The room lay so still that the faint hum of my flashlight seemed like thunder. I swallowed, drawing my penknife, its blade glinting in the low light more for comfort than defense. I took a hesitant step inside. The portraits formed a ring around me, their painted eyes two-faced in the dim glow, sometimes warm and human, sometimes cold and knowing. Each face bore an expression frozen in time: joy, desperation, madness. My beam flicked from one to the next. The first portrait held a matronly woman in a Victorian dress, clutching a locket to her chest. Her eyes were a milky blue one, cracked by a spiderweb fissure that made it seem as though the glass had cried. I felt her gaze pierce me, and I shivered. The second depicted a gaunt man in a blood-stained hospital gown, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His dark eyes tracked my beam, as if pleading for mercy and revenge. Amaska. I moved to the third portrait and nearly dropped my flashlight. It showed a small girl with tangled hair and a nightgown stained where her mother had cleaned her wounds. Her painted lips curved into a wistful smile, but her eyes, two pale orbs, followed me with a hunger that rooted me to the spot. I blinked, trying to shake the notion that her gaze shifted when I did. I took a step back. The room's air grew thick, pressing against my lungs. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled, light swinging across the chamber. The door was closed, its wood grain warped by time, and the maintenance panel I'd come through was now flush with the wall. My breath caught. I tried the door. It wouldn't budge. The faint hum of the building's pipes became a low moan, building into a chorus of sighs that seemed to emanate from the portraits themselves. I ducked my head, forcing myself to focus on the task document this room. I clicked open my journal and scribbled Portrait Room 15. Dusty canvases, walls closing in. I lifted my flashlight again and continued around the circle. The fourth portrait, a man in tattered priest's vestments, wore a vacant expression, as though he'd lost faith long ago. Beneath his collar, letters had been carved into the wood frame, "I no longer pray." The charge in those words vibrated through me. The fifth, a nurse in a starched white uniform, held a syringe in one slender hand. Her painted smile was sickly sweet, her eyes glinting with something predatory. I swallowed hard. I thought of the electric chairs and ice-cold lab equipment I'd already encountered. This place had a history of twisted care. The moans swelled, and I felt a cold breeze trace along my neck. My flashlight caught movement at the edge of its circle, a sixth portrait, older than the rest, framed in tarnished brass. It depicted Dr. Elgin Ward Lakenheath's founding physician, wearing a long black coat and a pocket watch chain coiled across his vest. His eyes, vivid gray, gleamed with a thin, cruel humor. He tipped his head at me as if beckoning. A thrill of fear climbed my spine. I backed away, but my boot heel scraped against the floor, and the portraits seemed to lean in. The seventh and eighth were set side by side, two children, twins perhaps with blank expressions and identical hospital gowns. Their hands were clasped, yet their bodies were twisted at impossible angles, as though the painter had tried to capture both innocence and suffering in a single image. I forced myself to look away. A sudden click rang out, echoing in the room. My flashlight flickered. The door behind me shivered once, twice, then swung open a crack. I squeezed past it, heart hammering, and pressed my back against the far wall. The narrow gap allowed only a sliver of the hallway beyond, but even that was enough. I peered through and saw an empty corridor, bathed in pale moonlight, filtering through a barred window. I leaned forward, intending to slip out, but when I turned back, the portraits had shifted. Two empty frames now hung side by side, gaps where faces should have been. My breath caught. I stumbled back, nearly toppling over the carved podium at the room's center. On it lay an open leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle. Across the ledger's spine, I read in a smudged hand, keepers of memories. My fingertips shook. As I flipped the pages, each entry listed a patient name, admission date, and a final note. Memory extracted. Memory corrupted. Memory claimed. Dr. Ward's name hovered in the first entry, dated 1897, with the last note, soul enshrined. The children's names, Clara and Henry Ellison, appeared under 1923. Lost to my design. Stains dark and crusted mottled the pages. A whisper drifted through the door, soft as silk. Remember us. I froze the ledger, slipping from my grasp. My flashlight clattered to the floor beam, skittering across the rotting tiles. The portraits, bristled canvases rippling though the air was still. Then, one by one, the empty frames began to refill. Shards of paint wove themselves back into faces, eyes blazing, mouths curled in half smiles or silent screams. I pinched my arm, certain I was hallucinating. The portrait stared with renewed intensity. The girl's lips parted, and the painted whisper reached my ears, barely audible. Help. The priest's broken vow inched across its frame. I still pray. Dr. Ward's watch glinted, as if wind had caught the chain on canvas, and he grinned wider than humanly possible. The moans crescendoed into frantic cries. No, stop. Don't let him in. The sound battered my eardrums. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. When I opened them, the room was silent again. The door hung wide, and the hallway beckoned. I didn't hesitate. I scooped up my flashlight and journal, one clumsy motion, and bolted through the doorway. My beam carved a path down the corridor as I ran, heart racing. The cries faded behind me, replaced by a gentle tapping above my head. I dared not look up. Instead, I sprinted toward a staircase marked Main Hall. Each step groaned in protest, and at the bottom, a pair of double doors lay ahead. Moonlight spilled through their cracked glass panes. I flung them open and spilled out into the foyer, the world of peeling wallpaper and broken chandeliers greeting me like an old adversary. My chest heaved, and I sank to the floor, shaking. The memory ledger burned in my mind's eye. Portraits that watched, then pleaded, then judged. I looked back at the corridor's mouth. The portrait's whispers lingered, but the door remained closed behind me, its carved griffin crest obscured by shadow. I stood slowly brushing dust from my jeans. I'd learned something crucial about Lakenheath tonight. Its walls were alive with stolen memories, and I had merely scratched the surface. I clicked my journal shut. It was time to press on. The roar of silence in the foyer pressed against my eardrums as I caught my breath. But something deeper thrummed beneath the floorboard's soft, tremulous voices that seemed to ripple up from the basement's bowels. I rose unsteadily, flashlight beam bobbing like a ship in a storm, and stepped toward the grand staircase. With each footfall, those voices swelled in volume, growing from indistinct murmurs to half-formed words. Anna, please, don't. Michael, come back. Their tones wove together in an eerie tapestry, impossible to untangle, yet each syllable clawed at my skull. I paused at the base of the stairs, listening to the chorus beneath. It was as if the asylum itself whispered names of the dead, desperate to be heard. My flashlight cast long wavering shadows across the peeling banisters. The ledger from the portrait room burned behind my eyes. Its entries, memory claimed a soul, enshrined, flashing in time with the voice's cadence. I squeezed my journal in one hand, pen in the other, as though I could record the ghost's litany before it vanished. A soft creak echoed overhead, and I snapped my head upward. The ornate ceiling rosettes were cracked bits of plaster dangling like decayed teeth. A single droplet of water fell splashing on the marble floor and dispersing in concentric ripples. My beam traced the stair's curve upward to landing, after landing each more ornate and forlorn than the last. The voices pulsed, urging me to descend. I took a hesitant step downward, the banister slick with dust. Beneath the floorboards, the murmurs grew more urgent, high-pitched tones laced with panic, low sobs, punctuating the haze of speech. My heart throbbed in my throat. I knelt on one knee and pressed my ear to the first step. The floor vibrated under my palm, alive with sorrow. A female voice, a child's, whispered my name. Breathless. Ali, Kaya, DDFG. It stuttered. My blood ran cold. How could they know me? I stumbled back, tripping over my own boots. My flashlight clattered its beam, dancing across the foyer's far wall and catching on a cracked support beam. In the splintered wood, I saw faint scratch marks, dozens of them, clawed into the grain, as though something had fought to get out. They trailed down toward the basement hatch, a low square trap door set between two marble columns. The hatch lay open now, the voices louder than ever, pouring upward like incense smoke. A dank breeze curled around my ankles, carrying the sour tang of mildew and something unplaceable like scorched memory. I knelt beside the hatch edge and peered into the abyss. Below, a set of narrow stairs descended into pitch black, the voices drifting in from that void. I shivered awareness, splitting me retreat to safety or follow the voices to their source. My rational mind begged for the former, my curiosity sharpened by every horror I'd witnessed so far insisted on the latter. I drew in a breath of cold air, steeling myself, and climbed down. Each step groaned a protest, and the light from above shrank until it was a pale circle at the shaft's mouth. Behind me, the whispers dimmed. Ahead, they grew urgent. At the bottom, my boot heel clicked against damp concrete. The voices swirled around me, now distinct enough to pluck out names: Eleanor, Joseph, Margaret, a litany of dread. I swept my flashlight across the walls. They were smooth, unbroken, pulsing with condensation. The air thrummed with static tension hair raising on my arms. I moved forward the floor, slick with water, pooling in shallow rivulets. A sudden draft swooped down the corridor, extinguishing my flashlight for a heartbeat. In that instant of darkness, I saw shapes, dark silhouettes, skittering along the wall, like insects fleeing light. When the beam returned, they were gone. My pulse thundered. I forced myself to take another step. The corridor ended at a T-junction. To the left, the voices came in softer waves. To the right, they roared like an audience unleashed. I turned right, compelled by something primal. The floor sloped downward, and the air grew colder, heavy enough to taste. My beam revealed patches of mold creeping up the walls, black and slick. A narrow pipe jutted from the ceiling, dripping steadily onto a rusted drain cover, each drop echoing in the darkness. I paused, pressing a hand to the wall. Behind it, I thought I could feel a heartbeat. A slow, deliberate pulse, like a slumbering giant beneath the asylum. The voices lifted in harmony, and I heard the words clearly. Free us. Find him. Broken. A final, Name Ward. Goosebumps rippled across my flesh. Dr. Ward, the founder, the keeper of memories. He lingered here in spirit, bound by something ancient. A low scraping reached my ears. My flashlight trembled as I spun. In the dim light, I saw the silhouette of a child ragged nightgown trailing behind, standing at the far end of the hall. Her head tilted at an impossible angle. I blinked, and she vanished. The scraping continued closer now, like tiny fingernails running along concrete. I shone my light down at the floor and saw dozens of small footprints soaked in water leading toward a door that hadn't been there moments before. Its wood was warped paint peeling in long tendrils. Above it, in faded lettering, read mortuary. The voices crescendoed into a frenetic pitch. "Don't let him! Save us! He's coming!" Pain lanced behind my eyes. I fumbled for my journal and wrote the words as they came. Basement voices, patient names, ward, mortuary door footprints appearing. The voices answered with a single unified shout. "Now, Ayo." I looked up. The mortuary door stood cracked open darkness, pooling beyond. A sour wind surged through the corridor, almost knocking me off balance. I swallowed the knot in my throat and stepped forward, flashlight beam skittering. My boots splashed in a shallow puddle at the threshold. As I neared, the voices softened, coalescing into a plaintive chant. "Forgive us. Release us." My hand trembled on the door frame. I peered inside. The room was stone-walled unlit, save for the ghostly glow of my flashlight. In the center lay two metal gurneys draped in tattered sheets. Each sheet bore the vague impression of a body beneath hollow and sunken. Around them, jars of formaldehyde glinted, their contents obscured by clouded glass. On the far wall, chalk scrawled, "Here lie the broken memories." I found my voice, sandwiched between terror and empathy. "Who are you?" I whispered. The chamber answered with silence, thick and oppressive. My beam hovered over the gurneys. On the first, I saw a name etched into the metal, Clara Ellison. A memory jolted through me, her portrait, her vanished face. On the second, Henry Ellison. I staggered backward, recalling their twisted canvas forms in the portrait room. A rustle behind me made me whirl. The gurneys rocked slow and purposeful, as though someone or something walked beneath the sheets. The chanting rose again, soft but insistent. "Let us go. Unbind our hearts." A pulse of movement stirred one sheet's edge, revealing a pale, withered foot-toes curled in perpetual torment. My breath caught. I fell to my knees. I don't know how. The voices chimed in sorrowful chorus. "The key beneath your feet." I shone my light at the puddle beneath me. The water shimmered, and a metal glint caught my eye, a small key engraved with the asylum's griffin crest. It lay submerged, half buried in grime. My fingers closed around it cold and slick. The door behind me creaked. I turned, and the darkness there seemed to pulsate, taking shape, a tall form with glowing red sockets, much like the creature in the sealed ward. It paused at the threshold, observing. The Ellison children's cries crescendoed. "Use it. Release us. Save us." Frozen between fear of the creature and pity for the trapped souls, I raised the key. The chanting swelled, and in that moment, I understood this key unlocked more than doors. It liberated memories, freed souls. But at what cost? My legs trembled. I steadied myself against the gurney. The creature advanced movement fluid, yet unnatural. The children's voices blended into a single phrase. Now, before he claims you too. My heart slammed. I slid the key into a small keyhole beneath the gurney's frame, and with a click, the locks fell away. The sheets rustled as the metal bars at the gurney's heads disappeared, releasing clouds of mist that coalesced into ethereal forms Clara and Henry, pale and youthful, their horrors fading into gratitude. They turned toward me, eyes soft and unburdened. But behind them, the creature snarled, stepping into the chamber. Its red eyes flared. I leaned forward, voice shaking, "Go." The twins drifted past me, passing through the walls, their murmurs of thanks echoing. The creature lunged, but the children's forms swirled around it, a luminous tide that pushed it back. It shrieked, recoiling, then dissolved into shadow. Silence fell. The air lightened, no longer heavy with sorrow. The gurney stood empty. The jars on the walls cracked their lids, popping free. I retrieved the key from my pocket, drenched in warmth rather than cold. The voices had faded, replaced by a gentle quiet. I stood trembling at the mortuary's threshold, flashlight beam dimming as if to rest. I had freed them, the forgotten, the broken. But Lockenheath's heart still beat, waiting. I pocketed the key and backed away, turning toward the stairs leading upward. The trap door loomed above, promises of the world beyond its darkness. As I climbed, a soft chorus of phantom laughter drifted up the shaft, playful, relieved. My chest loosened, breath smoothing. But the weight of that key in my pocket reminded me that liberation often comes tethered to deeper shadows. I emerged onto the second-floor landing, every muscle trembling from the mortuary's chill release. The staircase beneath my feet groaned, as though relieved not to bear my weight any longer. My flashlight's beam flickered across the ornate hallway, its wallpaper peeling in curling strips. A pair of massive arched windows at the far end spilled pale moonlight into the corridor, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny phantoms. I blinked, heart still racing, and forced my legs to carry me forward, each step measured against the dying throb of adrenaline. Halfway down the hall, I spotted a door set into a recessed alcove, one I hadn't noticed before. Its plaque read, "Observation Room." Curious, I edged closer, pressing my ear to the wood. Silence answered, stifling and absolute, interrupted only by the distant drip of water. I turned the doorknob. It resisted, then groaned open, revealing a small chamber lined with tall mirrors. The glass was cracked in spiderweb patterns, each fracture catching moonlight in silver shards. The room's air felt 10 degrees colder. I stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping across the reflective walls. Dozens of mirrors faced one another, creating endless reflections of myself, shrunken, elongated, contorted, until the corridor outside fractured into kaleidoscopic distortions. The floor was polished wood, slick with moisture, that caught my image in ghostly puddles. My pulse pounded so loud, I feared it would drown out every other sound. I approached the largest mirror at the room's center. Its frame was carved black oak, twisted into thorny vines and skeletal hands clutching the glass. I knelt, examining the carvings. Tiny scratches lined the surface of the frame, names hastily etched Anna Marcus Eleanor, matching the voices from the basement. My breath caught. I straightened, raising my flashlight to the mirror. For a heartbeat, My reflection stared back, blinking in perfect sync. Then something shifted. Behind my reflection, 2 steps back in the mirror world, I saw movement. A shape blurred just beyond the reach of my light, a hooded figure retreating into deeper reflection. I froze, flashlight trembling. Was it my mind playing tricks? I lifted a hand to the glass. My reflection lifted its hand an instant too late. A hiss rattled the air. The mirrors along the walls went dim, their surfaces rippling as though I'd thrown a stone into still water. I shook my head, heart in my throat, then blinked and looked again. The room appeared unchanged until the mirrors began to flicker, revealing scenes behind their surfaces. A nurse injecting a screaming patient. Twins in chains. Rocking in unison daughter Ward, standing over an operating table. They played out in silent loops, horrifying tableaus hidden beyond the glass. My flashlight's beam jerked upward to the ceiling, where a ventilation grate now rattled. I caught a glimpse of red eyes above, then nothing. The mirror ripples stilled. The corridor beyond beckoned, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the central mirror. Something about its glass felt alive, pulsing beneath my touch. I stood and stepped closer. The reflection of my flashlight beam elongated, stretching toward a dark corner. I watched, terrified and fascinated, as the beam's twin slipped through the glass's surface, leaving the room behind. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the reflection was no mere image. It was a portal. My rational mind screamed to flee, but my curiosity, tempered by the experiences so far, urged me to probe the unknown. I hesitated at the threshold, then reached out. My fingertips met icy glass. It rippled like oil, and I recoiled. A chorus of whispers rose up, urgent and pleading. Help. Find him. Remember. I closed my eyes, chiding my reckless fascination. I had freed the Ellisons. It was time to move on. Yet the mirror's pull wouldn't let me go. The hissing voice, low and menacing, drifted from behind me. Don't turn away. I spun, but the mirrors behind me showed only my own terrified face. When I turned back, the central mirror had changed. Instead of my reflection, I now saw the long corridor beyond the foyer, dimly lit and deserted. Above it, in skittering black letters on the glasses inside, a message appeared. He awaits. My stomach clenched. I knew who he was. The asylum's malignant core. Dr. Ward's lingering presence, the thing that had stalked me in the sealed ward. My flashlight flickered out, plunging me into opaque darkness. Panic flared, and I fumbled to click it back on. In that heartbeat of nothingness, I heard movement, a soft scrape like leather brushing wood coming from directly behind me. The flashlight flickered back to life in my hand beam, jerking to the opposite wall. The mirrors there now showed the observation room in ruined decay walls, blackened floorboards splintered, and across the far side, the silhouette of that gaunt figure with the glowing red sockets. I whirled, breathing hard, and swung my flashlight back to the central mirror. The message had shifted. Once you see, you cannot unsee. I felt the hairs on my neck stand at attention. The sound of cracking glass echoed behind me. I spun, but found the small alcove shuttered. The door had closed and latched silently. My flashlight beam danced across the mirrors. In each, I caught fleeting glimpses of myself, but altered my eyes, sunken clothes, torn skin pale. And always just behind me in the reflection was that shape disappearing when I turned. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to escape. I stumbled toward the door, but the floor rippled beneath my feet, warping the room's geometry until the exit no longer aligned with my sense of direction. My penknife caught against the floor. I cupped my hand around the blade and slashed at the nearest mirror edge, sparking against glass. The surface shattered outward in a shower of shards, and a cold wind surged through the room. The other mirrors cracked in rapid succession, their frames splintering the glass, warping like ice melting. The peeling shards floated in the air, then vanished into mist. In the central mirror's place, a doorway wrenched itself open, an arch of smoke and shadow. Within, I glimpsed a long hall, lit by lanterns, hung from broken beams, and at the end, a faint silhouette, tall imposing arms, outstretched in invitation. I felt the asylum's malignant will flood the observation room, pressing against me like a tidal wave of malevolence. My flashlight lay at my feet, its beam dead. My journal was in my pocket, bolstered by the key I had used downstairs. I dug it out, fumbled across its metal ridges, and held it aloft. The whispers rose to a frantic pitch. Key, memory, mirror, lock it away. The carved griffin on the key seemed to throb in my hand. I stepped toward the arch of shadow, every nerve ablaze. My reflection flickered in the remaining mirror shard I held. The silhouette at the end of that hall advanced shape, solidifying into Dr. Elgin Ward himself, pale gaunt, wearing his long black coat. His eyes, the same cruel gray, found mine. He smiled thinly. "Alikifdfgzm," he murmured, voice like dry leaves. "Welcome back." I lifted the key and plunged it into a small keyhole that had materialized beneath the shattered mirror's frame. With a resonant click, the doorway collapsed inward, smoke whirling into the shards before dissipating. The malignant force recoiled, and the remaining glass fragments dropped to the floor harmlessly. The alcove's door swung open, leading back to the hallway as it had been. I stumbled through breath-ragged flashlights still dead. The moonlight from the arched windows guided me down the corridor. The peeling wallpaper and flickering sconces looked ordinary again. My heart pounded, but the immediate threat had receded. The observation room's mirrors lay silent behind me, their surfaces dull and lifeless. I pressed my palm to the hallway wall, steadying my trembling limbs. The forged key's weight was a reminder Ward's influence lingered in every corner. But I had quelled his reflection's reach for now. I flexed my fingers, letting the key's cold metal ground me in reality. Ahead, the corridor forked one path to the main stairs, the other toward unexplored wings. I glanced down at my journal's blank pages and realized I needed to document what I'd witnessed. I would need every detail to truly understand Lakenheath's twisted mind, but first I needed light. I removed my penknife from its sheath, flicked it into the wall, sconce beside a faded stairwell sign, and pried it free. The bulb shattered sparks jumping across the wires. With luck, the circuit for this floor was still live. I turned to the switch panel at the next wall junction, flipped it on, and with a crackle, the corridor's lights buzzed to life. The hall glowed in a grim, flickering amber. I exhaled in relief, heart slowing. I slid the key into my jacket pocket and raised my journal. The ordeal at the mirrors would demand its own entry. But for now, with steady steps, I headed toward the next mystery. The corridor's brittle light faded behind me as I approached a single unmarked door set into an alcove I was certain hadn't existed moments before. My flashlight skimmed the metal surface, revealing chipping paint and a narrow slot at eye level, like a jailer's peephole. There was no handle, only a heavy latch on the inside. My pulse stuttered. I reached out and lifted the latch. The door swung open silently, revealing a cell barely the size of a closet. Concrete walls, unadorned, a single iron cot bolted to one side, and nothing else. The air inside was thick, close so stifling I could taste the rust. I stepped in and let the door swing shut behind me with a soft click that echoed unnaturally in the confined space. My flashlight's beam raked the cell floor stained with dark smudges, a small drain in the corner, and nothing to break the oppressive gloom. I fumbled for my journal, heart hammering, and scribbled, "Solitary cell. Discovered behind hidden door." Before I even began to observe, a shudder ran through the cell as though it inhaled. The latch rattled on its hinge. I pressed my shoulder against the door hand on the cold metal, willing it to stay shut. My breath came in shallow bursts. The distant echo of my own footfalls on the corridor's tiles was gone. Now, in place of those, I heard something else, a soft, deliberate exhalation, an unseen breath just behind me. I spun, flashlight beam piercing the darkness. There was nothing there but rough concrete. My reflection shimmered dimly on the iron cot's bare frame. The breath came again, closer this time, and a soft rasp like fingernails dragging across stone. I swallowed, stepping backward until I touched the wall. I raised my flashlight to inspect every crack, every blemish. Nothing. "Hello," my voice trembled. It sounded foreign hollow. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat the cell was plunged into darkness. When the beam returned, I saw, on the wall beside me, etched deep into the concrete, 2 words, "He waits." I jerked back, heart in my throat. The letters were fresh edges, crisp, as though someone or something had carved them in my absence. My mind reeled. I'd freed souls downstairs. Here I was trapped with a warning. The latch clinked. I inched forward, hand outstretched, and tried to lift it. It refused to budge. Pulling harder, I felt the door shift, then resist. Panic knotted in my gut. I slammed my shoulder against the door. No movement. Something tapped behind me, a deliberate rap, low and rhythmic, like an old clock ticking in reverse. I pressed my ear to the wall. The tapping echoed faintly, then morphed into a slow heartbeat. My own pulse thundered in my ears, yet this stencil of sound was too deep to be mine. It vibrated through the concrete floor, calling to me, beckoning me deeper into that cell's darkness. I backed away until my foot struck the iron cot's leg, sending a jangle through the tiny room. Footsteps sounded low, dragging outside the door. My flashlight's beam swung toward the peephole slot. A faint red glow appeared there, like the ember of a dying fire. I squinted, heart racing. Behind the slot, I thought I saw 2 glowing eyes. Then a slit of movement before it vanished. Cold dread unfurled through me. I pressed my palm to the peephole's metal edge. My breath clouded there. A whisper startled me. Remember. It hissed so close, I felt the breeze against my cheek. The iron cot rattled. I swallowed, fighting nausea. I had to get out. I shoved at the latch again. The door sprang open farther than before. I tumbled backward, flashlight clattering to the floor. The door yawned wide, revealing empty corridor and moonlit paint peeling in ghostly patterns. The breath behind me exhaled in triumph. I scrambled upright, snatching my flashlight, but as I turned toward the exit, the cell seemed to stretch. The cot receded into a distant corner, the walls lengthening into black infinity. My flashlight's beam wavered, unable to reach the farther corners. The door I'd just pried open looked narrower, as though the cell had swallowed itself. Anxiety unspooled in my mind. Once inside, I wasn't sure I'd ever leave. I forced my legs to move, stepping forward until I collided with the cot. My flashlight revealed scratches on the mattress platform, dozens of them, like frantic attempts to keep from disappearing. Beneath the cot, something stirred, a figure crouched low, too small for an adult, its back arched. I raised my light. The shape looked childlike but unnatural. Long limbs, slender fingers, curling around the bars of an imaginary cage. A soft voice, childlike, whispered, "Don't go." It was both plea and command. My chest clenched. The figure remained motionless. I felt the cell grow colder. Frost bloomed on the concrete, spreading in lace-like patterns around my boots. I stepped backward, hand falling to my journal. I flipped to a blank page and scrawled, "Cell-breathing child apparition door distorting." A creaking groan echoed from the far wall. A seam in the concrete split, and a narrow slit opened, glowing with faint red light. From within, a bony hand emerged, then an arm, then a gaunt form, with hollow eyes and a tall skeletal frame. My flashlight's beam jolted to life, and I glimpsed the creature, elongated limbs, ending in finger-like talons. Its face, a blank mask of bone. The child figure before the cot faded, replaced by this larger horror emerging from the crack. I dropped my journal and stumbled back. The door's slit yawned wider. The latch snapped open behind me without protest. The hallway's light beckoned. I lunged through, racing into the corridor, and the door slammed shut with a resonant clang. I didn't dare look back until I reached the safety of the overhead lights my flashlight left spinning in the silent cell. I pressed my forehead against the cool corridor wall chest, heaving. The voices from the basement had faded, replaced here by terrified gasps in my mind. I cradled my journal, flipping to the fledgling notes. The cell had tried to claim my memories, demanded. I remember something I couldn't yet name. Its birthmark warning. He waits, etched in my blood. Moonlight spilled in from a nearby window, illuminating the corridor's peeling plaster. I forced my breath to slow knuckles, whitening around my journal. The solitude of the cell still pulsed behind that door, a living thing conscious of my intrusion. Somewhere deep inside me, I felt a fragment of that child's sorrow and the memory of her plea. "Don't go," echoed in my thoughts, but I had to press on. Lakenheath had more secrets waiting, more horrors to reveal, and I had to see them before they consumed me altogether. I straightened, repaired the latch on the former cell door with my penknife, and sealed it once more. Another mark on my path, another promise of what lingered in the asylum's hidden flesh. I turned back to the main corridor, flashlight beam steady once more. The ward map in my mind expanded, sealed ward portrait room chapel archives. And now, this solitary cell, a wound in the asylum's skin where something waited. I tucked my journal away pen, poised. The next door ahead would reveal part of the dark machinery that fed this place. With a final, trembling breath, I stepped forward deeper into Lakenheath's living nightmare. The heavy scent of incense, long since burned out, clung to the air as I entered the chapel. A cavernous space framed by crumbling stone arches stretched before me, dimly lit by shards of moonlight, piercing shattered stained glass windows. The pews lay splintered and overturned, their once polished wood scarred by time and neglect. I navigated the debris, each step echoing through the vaulted hall, the sound hollow and accusing. A jagged column of stained glass still clung to its frame at the eastern wall, depicting a haloed figure I half recognized from my catechism classes. Now, its vibrant colors faded to ghostly pastels. My flashlight skated across the pews, revealing broken hymnals strewn like fallen leaves. The pages curled and yellowed, their ink blotched beyond legibility. A single hymnal lay open on the floor, its spine cracked, but the final verse remained legible amidst the ruin. In darkness we shall find our light. I paused, heart stuttering, and traced the words with a fingertip. How often had I sought comfort in meant-to-be hopeful lines only to find them hollow beneath Lakenheath's rot. Ahead, the altar stood elevated on a dais, its marble surface stained with rings of rust and dark splotches that resembled dried blood. The cloth that once draped it had disintegrated, threads hanging like spiderwebs from tarnished brass candlesticks. I approached carefully, noting how the floor beneath the altar was clearer of rubble, as if someone or something had guarded this ground. My flashlight's beam caught a series of symbols carved into the marble lip. A crescent moon entwined with a serpent, a pair of clasped hands, and finally a downward-pointing triangle piercing a circle. My breath caught. These symbols matched none of the orthodox iconography I knew. They felt ancient arcane, the language of rituals performed in corners of faith long abandoned. I bent to run a finger across the serpent's coil, then recoiled as the cold marble bit into my skin. I lifted my flashlight higher, illuminating the alcove behind the altar. There, a small recess housed fragments of what looked like a broken reliquary, a box once used to hold holy relics. Its lid lay cracked and half buried in dust. Inside, nothing remained but a smear of something dark and sticky. A soft flutter reached my ears like pages turning. I swung my beam toward the pews, expecting to see a breeze stirring loose paper. Instead, I caught a brief movement at the corner of my eye, a white-gloved hand sliding along the floor. My heart thumped so loud I feared it would betray me. I crouched and edged forward, breath shallow. The fragments of the reliquary shifted as though pushed by invisible fingers, then fell across the center aisle in a jangle of metal. I froze. The whisper of fabric sliding on stone sounded again. I aimed my light at the side aisles. There, draped over an overturned pew, hung a tattered robe stained with what looked like ash. I approached, noting how its sleeves were embroidered with the same serpent and moon motif. This was no discarded garment. It was ritual vestment long abandoned in haste or perhaps in shame. A sudden crack echoed from the ceiling. I looked up to see a stone gargoyle loosened from its perch, teetering before toppling toward me. I dove back, rolling to my side as it struck the floor with earth-shaking force. Dust roared into the air, and I coughed, shielding my face. When the dust settled, the altar stood untouched, serene amid the violence. I drew wiping grit from my mouth and retraced my path to the dais. My flashlight caught new marks in the marble flooring, footprints tiny and dripping with something dark. I followed them toward the choir loft at the back. The loft staircase was half collapsed. I grasped a splintered handrail and hauled myself upward. Each step groaned, threatening to give way, but I pressed on until I reached the platform. On the loft floor, the vaulted ceiling arched overhead, painted once with angels in flight, now chipped away to bare plaster. The pews here were smaller, meant for a choir, and arranged in a semicircle. I swept my light across them. In the center chair lay a small wooden box, carved with the same downward triangle insignia. My breath caught as I saw the lock was intact. I knelt and examined the box's lid, pressed with faint impressions. He will return. A surge of dread raced along my spine. Who was he, the founder? The malignant spirit I'd glimpsed, or someone darker still? I thumbed the box's lock. It gave with a soft click, revealing inside a length of tarnished chain and a pendant shaped like the chapel's emblem, a serpent coiled around a crescent moon. I lifted it carefully, and the chain rattled against the box, echoing like distant bells. The moment I held the pendant, the choir loft radio crackled to life, spitting static that cut through the chapel's stillness. My flashlight flickered, and the overhead chandelier, hanging on a single rusted chain, swung violently, though no breeze stirred. I jumped back, pendant clutched in trembling fingers. A whisper slithered around me. Restore the covenant. The pendant grew, cold pressing ice through my palm. The static burst into garbled voices chanting the chapel's hymnal. In darkness, we shall find our light, they sang, warped and dissonant. The words scraped against my sanity, half hymn, half curse. The chandelier's motion slowed, then halted. Silence fell heavy as gravestones. The pendant's coldness lifted, leaving only its weight, a reminder of the fractured faith that once thrived here. I pocketed it, glancing down at the footprints leading away from the box toward a narrow door set behind the pulpit. I descended from the loft and approached that door. Its paint was cracked, the handle ornate brass, identical to the chapel's other fixtures. I nudged it open. Beyond lay a spiral staircase, carving downward into blackness. The voices from the chapel choir loft drifted up in sporadic echoes, like memories of worship long ceased. My heart thundered as I peered over the staircase's edge. Damp stone steps wound into the earth. This was no ordinary basement. It felt like an undercroft of secrets. The pendant in my pocket seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I took a deep breath, wiping sweat from my brow despite the chill, and began the descent. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though gravity itself resisted my intrusion. The walls closed in moisture, beating on my skin. The singing voices faded, replaced by the distant drip of water and the whisper of shifting stone. I kept hold of the pendant, its emblem a compass pointing me towards some dark covenant I had yet to understand. When I reached the bottom, the staircase opened onto a narrow corridor, one I was sure I'd never seen. Water pooled underfoot, chilling my boots. Ahead, a heavy door sat flanked by votive niches, each containing a single unlit candle. The niche's walls bore more symbols, triangles, serpents, intertwined hands, an entire language of ritual carved into stone. I pressed my palm to the door. A hum vibrated through the slab as if the chapel above still breathed in concert. With a deep breath, I lifted the pendant and placed it against the door's surface. The metal of the pendant met cold stone, and the symbols around me began to glow, faintly lines of phosphorescence tracing the arcane patterns. A low rumble shook the corridor. The votive candles burst into flame, their light flickering in the dank air. The door before me cracked along an ancient seam, and a cavernous chamber beyond yawned open. Though I could not yet see inside, I felt the chapel's covenant, the faith fractured and twisted, here reach out in welcome and warning. I swallowed, steeling my resolve. Whatever lay beyond this threshold would tie together the chapel's broken faith and Lakenheath's darker purpose. I tightened my grip on the pendant, pocketed my flashlight, and stepped through into the unknown. The chamber beyond the chapel's undercroft yawned before me, an arched gallery lined with iron-bound cabinets that stretched into darkness. The air was thick with the musty scent of decaying paper and something acrid like chemicals long since evaporated. My flashlight's beam swept across rows of filing cabinets, each drawer labeled in spidery script: patient files, experimental logs, ritual records, unidentified specimens. The pendant's glow had faded now, leaving me reliant on the wavering light in my hand as I stepped forward, boots stirring centuries of dust. I found an empty alcove and set my journal on its ledge. My pulse echoed in my ears as I lifted the handle of the nearest drawer marked experimental logs. The metal groaned and a brittle folder slid free. I caught a whiff of damp paper and flipped it open. The pages were yellowed edges, curled, filled with meticulous handwriting and occasional splatters of something dark. The header read, Subject 149, Psychokinetic Resonance. My blood ran cold. I recalled the hydrotherapy chanting the termination scheduled. I flipped further and discovered diagrams of brainwave readings paired with crude sketches of patients convulsing beneath electrodes. A soft rustle behind me made me spin. The cabinets, hundreds of them, stood unnervingly still. My heart thundered. I ducked behind the alcove as a shadow moved at the edge of the corridor. I froze. The shape slid between drawers, fluid and silent. I clenched my flashlight like a weapon. The pendant, still in my jacket pocket, pulsed faintly, reminding me of the covenant below. I needed to find Dr. Ward's personal archives, rumored to hold the asylum's darkest secrets. I scanned the cabinet labels until I found ritual records and yanked that drawer open. Inside lay ledger books, bound in cracked leather, their pages numbered beyond any logical order. Some dated centuries ago, others as recent as the 1950s. I lifted the first tome, and the spine cracked the cover, peeling back to reveal symbols matching those in the chapel triangle's serpent's clasped hands. I flipped to the middle and found entries describing ceremonies to bind patients' memories into vessels, doll eyes, reliquaries, portraits, and to channel collective anguish into a singular locus of power the asylum itself. One note caught my eye. Covenant breached at midnight. Require new vessel. Midnight again, it was the hour I'd arrived. Dr. Ward's plan had been to create unending sanctum of torment powered by extracted memories. A sudden hiss echoed from the far end of the gallery. My flashlight beam darted to the source. A cabinet door swung open slowly, its latch clicking. I swallowed, heart pounding, and edged closer. Inside, I found vellum-bound scrolls detailing incantations, some in Latin, others in a cipher I couldn't decipher. A single scroll lay unfurled across the bottom of the cabinet, its text smeared. Yet on its margin, in Dr. Ward's bold script, was one phrase I could read: to return, unlock the crystal heart. My pulse tightened. Earlier, I'd glimpsed a crystal heart suspended in a display case behind the reception desk, an artifact of unknown origin. Was that the crystal heart? The notion that it powered the asylum's curse made my blood turn icily still. I closed the ledger and slid it beneath my coat. My flashlight caught movement again. This time, the shape was closer, drifting past the ends of the cabinets, tall and gaunt limbs, splayed like a spider. I swallowed hard and backed away, careful not to jostle the cabinets. The whisper of paper sliding reached my ears. I spun light, skirting across the cabinet tops, and realized I was surrounded, drawers ajar on every side as if the archives themselves breathed. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed behind me. The corridor's end yawned in darkness. I could see the exit sign toward Ward E, but the gaunt figure blocked the path. My breath came in short gasps. The figure paused, head tilting at an unnatural angle, its red eyes glowing. I raised my flashlight. The beam caught its face, hollow cheeks, pale skin stretched across skull lips, pulled back in a grin that wasn't human. I remembered the term, termination scheduled. This was one of Dr. Ward's failed experiments, freed now to wander these halls. My mind raced, no weapon, only the archives and that scroll's phrase. I needed the crystal heart, but it lay far behind me. To reach it, I'd have to outrun this thing through the labyrinth of cabinets. I turned on my heel and dashed for the exit, heart hammering. The figure glided after me in silence, and the cabinets rattled as I passed, sending folders fluttering to the floor. I sprinted down the gallery until I found the door labeled Ward E. I yanked it open and slammed inside, cutting off the corridor. The room was empty, save for a row of cracked windows and a collapsed desk. Dust motes danced in the beam, and a low wind sighed through broken panes. I leaned against the door flashlight, trembling. The gaunt figure pressed against the metal from the other side as though curious. I steadied my breath, pressing my ear to the door. Its breath shivered on the other side, cold hollow. I rifled through my coat pocket for the key, but found only the ledger and the pendant. The crystal heart's key phrase echoed in my mind. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Unlock the crystal heart." The pendant warmed in my pocket. I fumbled for it, clasped it in my hand, then slipped out a small key, know the ledger's hidden clasp. I pressed it against the door's lock mechanism and spun it. The door clicked, swinging open before me. I bolted into the corridor, hopeful panic propelling me toward the reception area. My flashlight's beam led the way as the gaunt figure stalked me again. Each turn seemed endless. the archives branching like roots beneath the asylum. But at last, I spotted flickering light. Up ahead, and beyond it, a display case set into the wall bathed in a lone spotlight. Inside, on a marble pedestal, rested a crystal, pulsing with a dim inner glow. A heart shape carved from smoky quartz. My legs burned as I skidded to a halt before the case. The gaunt figure paused in the shadows, its form half obscured. I edged closer, noting the case's absence of visible locks. A plaque read, "Crystal of Souls, do not disturb." My mouth went dry. I lifted the pendant, its serpent motif tracing the curve of the crystal. Heart hammering, I pressed it against the glass. The crystal's glow intensified veins of light spreading across its surface. A rumble shook the wall. The gaunt figure hissed and lurched toward me. The crystal vibrated wildly, light pulsing in thunderous rhythm. I pressed the pendant harder, then with a resonant crack, the glass shattered. Shards tinkled to the floor as the crystal descended into my waiting palm. The air roared as a flood of whispered names poured through me. Eleanor, Michael, Clara, Henry, and then silence. The gaunt figure stood still, its red eyes dimming. The crystal's glow softened to a tranquil pulse. I clutched it to my chest, turning away at last from Lakenheath's hidden archives, heart pounding not with fear, but with the weight of countless souls, now freed and burdened by their final gift. My boots echoed against the marble floor as I retraced my steps from the reception gallery back toward the east wing. Crystal heart cradled against my chest like a fragile promise. The pendant's light had dimmed to a soft pulse, its rhythm now synchronized with my own heartbeat, a comforting reminder of the souls I'd freed and of the power still contained within this smoky quartz organ. The gaunt figure had vanished after the crystal's release, its red eyes extinguished. I dared hope I'd see it no more. Yet, as I passed through Wardy's threshold, a fresh chill coursed down my spine. The corridor stretched before me in darkness, moonlight failing to penetrate its far end. My flashlight's battery flickered, then steadied. I exhaled and squared my shoulders, pressing forward. Each step carried the weight of my purpose. I had one final confrontation to endure before escape, one last brush with the asylum's malignant core. I'd come to call this stretch the Phantom Wing, for it was here that I first heard footsteps, when alone, distant treads that never materialized into flesh and bone. Tonight, the echo began. Almost immediately, a soft click of heels or boots tapping against tile. I froze. The crystal's pulse hissed in reply, quickening. My breath caught. I swept my flashlight's beam along the walls. A row of sealed ward doors, locked for decades, lined the corridor. The labels were worn away, but I recognized the smell of old antiseptic beneath layers of dust. The phantom footsteps drew nearer, slow and deliberate, yet no shape emerged from the gloom. My pulse quickened. I adjusted my grip on the crystal, its surface suddenly warm. Another footstep, soft low, followed by another. I called out, voice hoarse, "Who's there?" Silent sound answered. Then the footsteps resumed passing behind me. I spun nothing. My beam sliced through shadow. My heart thundered in my ears. The crystal thrummed against my palm, urging me onward down the corridor. I rounded a corner and spotted a solitary figure in the distance, backlit by moonlight streaming through a broken window. Relief coursed through me. I wasn't alone. I rushed forward. "Please help me," I called. But as I approached, the figure dissolved into mist, a silhouette of a nurse from the portrait room. Her form cracking at the edges, drifting upward like smoke. Her footsteps continued past where she'd stood, moving deeper into the wing. My breath hitched. I pursued, following the phantom's sound. Each step forward made my surroundings shift, the walls leaning indoors, lengthening the ceiling, crouching lower. The footsteps echoed around me, growing louder as they led me towards the end of the corridor. Moonlight fractured through jagged windows, casting shaky patterns across the walls. Finally, I rounded another corner and came to a dead end, a solid wall, bearing only a small ventilation grate set near the floor. The footsteps ceased. My flashlight's beam landed on the grate, its metal bars unbroken, dust undisturbed. I stepped closer, kneeling to regard it. A faint warmth emanated through the bars, and I heard a faint, desperate scrape from within, as though someone or something pressed against steel. I pressed my cheek to the grate and whispered, "I freed you." Silence answered. Then a soft sigh. Relief or lament, I couldn't say. My palm brushed against the cold metal. The crystal in my other hand pulsed brighter, and the grate's bars shivered a thin crack tracing through the nearby plaster. My gaze lifted to the wall above the grate, where a faded symbol had been painted long ago. A serpent coiled around a moon, the same mark from the chapel's reliquary. Beneath it, carved in chipped plaster, was a single word: return. The crystal's pulse aligned with my own urging comprehension. I realized then that every phantom, every whisper, every shrine I'd encountered since the sealed ward had guided me here. I slid the crystal heart against the plaster below the symbol. The surface glowed veins of pale light tracing new lines around the serpent's coils. The grate rattled and bursts of dust fell as the bars twisted inward with a low groan. My flashlight's beam danced across widening gaps. With a final creak, the grate swung open into the darkness beyond. A damp wind billowed outward, carrying the scent of earth and rot. I peered in. Beyond lay a small chamber, dimly lit by phosphorescent mold, a hidden antechamber beneath the phantom wing. At its center stood a carved stone basin, stained dark, etched with that same ritual language, memory's passage. The crystal's glow intensified, illuminating the basin and 12 shallow carvings around its rim, each shaped like a memory vessel. A portrait frame, a reliquary, a doll's eye, a syringe, a shard of mirror, among others. I knelt at the grate's threshold, heart pounding. The whisper of 1,000 voices rose in my mind. Patients, children, victims, each name echoing faintly. My grip on the crystal tightened. I understood this chamber had been the asylum's original nexus, where Dr. Ward Bound collected memories to empower his experiments. Freeing each soul had undone one vessel. Now I held the final key to shatter the asylum's heart. The basin's smooth surface rippled as I placed the crystal within a recess at its center. Light erupted outward, flooding the chamber with pale luminescence. The carvings flickered, and wispy specters emerged, swirling like motes of dust given life. Faces Clara Henry, Anna Michael glimmered in the haze, eyes closed in peaceful reprieve. Their whispered thanks brushed my ears. A tremor shook the grate, and the corridor above quaked as if the entire wing inhaled. I scrambled to the grate and dragged myself through, stumbling back into the corridor as the chamber below collapsed in a cascade of stone. The phantom footsteps rang out once more this time, steady and approaching from both directions, but no figure emerged. The corridor, S-E-E-M-E-D, seemed to breathe walls, straightening light returning to the lanterns. I stood in the center of the hallway, crystal gone from my hand, replaced by a lingering warmth in my palm. The printed grin of the serpent and moon symbol now faded to bare plaster. Silence reigned, profound and final. The air felt lighter, free of sorrow of dread. I exhaled, relief flooding through me. Lakenheath Asylum trembled in the distance, its centuries of cruelty unmade in that hidden chamber. I closed my eyes, letting the hush settle into my bones. Ahead, the corridor now led unambiguously to the front doors, moonlight guiding my path. With the phantom footsteps gone and the souls granted their rest, I stepped forward toward freedom, toward the world beyond midnight's reach and away from the asylum's broken heart. A tremor still hummed in my veins as I reached the asylum's grand entrance hall, moonlight pooling across shattered floor tiles. The front doors stood mere yards ahead, their iron bars twisted aside, as though inviting me to flee. My hand hovered on the doorknob, the cool metal a promise of escape, when a distant rumble crawled up from beneath my boots. The floorboards vibrated resonant and insistent, as though something deep below was awakening. I paused, heart thundering. The crystal heart's power had unbound the souls, but it had also unsettled the asylum's foundations. The tremor grew stronger, and a low, sonorous vibration echoed through the hall. Dust cascaded from the rafters. The doors rattled their iron frames, quaking in the moonlight. I realized with a jolt that the earth beneath me was shifting, and that whatever lay below would crawl upward if given the chance. Against every instinct to run, I stepped backward. The tremor subsided almost as quickly as it had started, leaving the hall trembling in its wake. But I felt its message clear. There was one final chamber, one last secret, buried beneath the asylum's lowest bowels. I swallowed hard and turned away from freedom's threshold, choosing descent over safety. A narrow stairwell, tucked behind the reception desk, previously unnoticed, spiraled downward into near total darkness. I crossed the hall, each footfall echoing across fractured marble, and pressed my palm to the cold stone railing. The stairwell's mouth yawned like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam glancing off cracked motes of plaster overhead, and began the descent. The stairs groaned beneath my weight, the handrail slick with grime. Dampness seeped from the walls, and each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, saturated with a dank musk that tasted of mold and old machinery. My breaths came in shallow puffs, misting in the beam's glow. Behind me, the moonlit foyer faded into shadow, until only the stairwell's black maw remained. Midway down, I passed a landing with a single iron door. Its surface was pitted with rust, the word boiler room still legible through peeling paint. I hesitated. Heat and steam once coursed through this wing, then pried it open. Inside, a tangle of corroded pipes and valves filled the cramped space, and the stench of oil and mildew stung my nostrils. The boiler itself lay cold and dormant, a hulking metal leviathan scarred by decades of disuse. But what caught my eye was a hatch set into the floor near the furnace's base. Its hinges were intact, the latch sealed by a padlock. I knelt and ran my fingers along its edge. Beneath a thick film of dust, I made out carved letters, foundations. My throat tightened. This hatch led deeper beneath the asylum's basement into the stone foundations themselves. I retrieved the small key I had used in the mortuary and the archives fitting it into the padlock. It clicked open with surprising ease. The hatch creaked as I lifted it, revealing a narrow metal ladder descending into pitch black. A cold draft snaked upward, carrying the distant sound of rushing water, or something worse. I shone my light down the shaft. The ladder's rungs gleamed wet, and I could just make out damp stone walls disappearing into darkness. My pulse hammered, but I forced myself to climb down. Each rung rattled beneath my fingers. Dripping water splashed my boots. The air grew so cold, I could see my breath, and the beam of my flashlight fractured against rough stone. At last, I touched solid ground, a dirt floor slick with moisture. I steadied my light and found myself in a tunnel carved into bedrock barely wide enough to stand. The tunnel extended forward in a straight line, supported by ancient timber beams rotted nearly through. Faint luminescence, perhaps bioluminescent mold, glowed in patches along the walls. I pressed forward, each step crunching over loose stone. The air pulsed with an undercurrent of sound, a low gurgle like water moving through unseen channels, but also something more insidious, a faint rhythmic heartbeat that resonated through the floor. I followed the sound until the tunnel opened into a vast subterranean cavern. My flashlight beam stretched across an enormous arch of stone pillars, their surfaces slick with moss. Pools of stagnant water dotted the floor, reflecting the pale glow of phosphorescent growth. At the cavern's center stood a circular dais, carved from the bedrock itself, its surface worn smooth by countless rituals. Inlaid into the stone was a large heart-shaped depression, the counterpart to the crystal I had placed in the memory basin. I stepped onto the dais, echoing through the cavern like a drumbeat. Water lapped at the dais's edge. The heartbeat grew louder, synchronized with the pulses I'd felt earlier. I swept my light across the walls and saw them lined with niches, empty alcoves that once held drained vessels, jars, reliquaries, doll eyes, shards of mirror. They were all gone, freed by my earlier efforts. Only the depression in the dais remained unfilled. A deep voice echoed through the cavern, a rumble that shook the stones. You have freed the fragments, but the heart remains bound. The words didn't come from a throat. They rose from the cavern itself. The lights dimmed, the phosphorescence fading, the water stilled. The dais's depression glowed faintly, and the heartbeat grew unbearably loud. I realized with dread that I carried the final vessel in my hand, my own memory perhaps, or the essence of Dr. Ward's design. The crystal heart I held glowed in response, veins of light tracing its smoky surface. I knelt beside the depression, placing the crystal within its carved embrace. The moment it touched stone, A wave of sound crashed through the cavern, voices countless and overlapping, crying out in despair and release. The crystal sank into the stone, the depression closing around it like the petals of a flower folding shut. Light erupted, flooding the cavern in blinding brilliance. The dais vibrated under my knees, water sloshing in its pools. The heart-shaped inlay glowed white-hot, burning with the combined essence of every soul Dr. Ward had ever trapped. Then, as quickly as it had erupted, the light snapped out. Darkness swallowed the cavern, leaving only the faint drip of water and the echo of a final distant heartbeat, one that slowed, then stopped. The phosphorescent mold flickered back to life, gradually casting the tunnel in a gentle, ethereal glow. The depression on the dais lay empty, its role fulfilled. I rose slowly, chest heaving, and realized the cavern's oppressive weight had lifted. The stagnant air no longer felt fetid, but fresh, as though life had returned to these stones. The distant sound of rushing water now carried hope rather than dread. The cavern walls, once lined with empty niches, were blank, cleansed of their dark burden. I retreated down the tunnel, ascending the ladder and passing through the boiler room once more. The furnace above seemed less menacing, its pipes silent and cold. I closed the hatch behind me and secured the padlock, sealing the foundations of Lakenheath's malevolence beneath layers of stone. Returning to the grand foyer, I found the front doors still ajar, bathed in moonlight. The asylum above slumbered, its heart at last silenced. I stepped through those doors and into the night, lungs filling with cool air that tasted of freedom. The gates creaked open before me, and I walked through without looking back, knowing that what lay beneath would remain buried forever. My breath hitched as I stepped out onto the moonlit grounds, the night air cool against damp skin. But the chill inside me had nothing to do with temperature. In my hand, the heavy key I'd retrieved from the mortuary felt like a living thing, its metal edges biting into my palm, as though it bore the weight of every tortured soul I'd encountered. The asylum rose around me, dark windows like hollow eyes watching my every move. I knew the way. Now the path to the overgrown courtyard, then the wrought iron gate that marked the boundary between this living nightmare and the world beyond. But I couldn't move, not yet. A low, keening wind rustled through the tangled vines on the courtyard walls. In that sound, I heard voices, soft, at first, then urgent, insistent. "Don't leave us. Hold on." I turned flashlight, sweeping across the warped statues that lined the walkway, angels, with eroded faces, saints kneeling in perpetual prayer. Under the beam, one statue's hand seemed to twitch, as though urging me to stay. My heart thundered in my chest, a desperate drumbeat that threatened to drown out all rational thought. The night sky had shifted. Clouds now obscured the moon, and stars blinked out one by one. Darkness pooled between the statues like ink. Behind me, the asylum's front doors groaned as though the building itself had exhaled in warning. My legs trembled. Part of me wanted nothing more than to sprint to the gate and wrench it open. But another part, some deeper, more primal instinct, held me fast. I owed them more. The freed souls, the voices still clamoring at my back. I owed them peace, and I knew that until I offered one final gesture, they would not rest. The courtyard path tilted downward toward a sunken fountain, its basin cracked and dry. Moss choked its edges, and at its center sat a chipped marble urn, ornate though heavy with neglect. I recognized it from the archives labeled simply Vessel Heartsong. The urn's surface was carved with the same serpent and moon motif, interwoven with a ring of clasped hands. It was the final vessel, a receptacle meant to contain the asylum's collective anguish, once the crystal heart had failed. But I had the key. I approached the urn, the ground beneath my boots soft with fallen leaves and creeping ivy. The voices swelled into a unified chorus. Open it. Release us. My fingers closed around the key's bow. I knelt, heart hammering so fiercely I thought it might crack my ribs. The urn's lid lay askew, as if someone or something had already pried at it. I set my flashlight beside me and lifted the lid fully. A swirl of cold air roared up from within, extinguishing the small beacon's light. Darkness pressed in so thick it felt solid. I could barely see the urn's interior, but I felt it, a pulsing presence like a heart beating in time with my own. I placed the key inside its metal warm now, humming with ancient energy. The moment it touched the urn's center, a tremor rattled the basin's cracked tiles and sent a shiver through my spine. The voices rose in a final triumphant wail. A ribbon of spectral light, pale blue, then white, spiraled from the urn, coalescing into shapes before me. First Clara and Henry, their forms luminous and serene eyes, closed in gratitude. Then, the children from the ward, the twins from the portrait room, the solitary cell's wounded apparition, each stepping into existence for a heartbeat, their faces unmarked by fear. They floated above the fountain, a congregation of the freed, their joined hands forming a circle of light. Around us, the courtyard walls shifted. Statues leaned forward, vines recoiling as though stung. The spectral choir's voices harmonized into a melody so pure it cut through the asylum's final echoes of pain. I felt the key's hum thrumming through my veins, a bridge between worlds. Then, with a single radiant pulse, the light surged upward, engulfing the courtyard. The spectral forms dissolved into motes of glowing dust that drifted skyward, slipping through cracks in the clouds until the moon shone fully once more. The urn's lid slammed shut, the key falling clattering to the stone floor. Silence crashed down. The statues stood inert, vines lay quiet, and the fountain's basin lay empty, its last burden lifted. I knelt, chest heaving, as the echo of that final melody faded into the night. Behind me, the asylum's front doors shuddered twice, then fell silent. I rose slowly, brushing dirt from my jeans eyes, fixed on the wrought iron gate, now glowing softly in the moonlight. No longer did the bodies of stone watch me with accusing eyes. Instead, the courtyard felt hushed at peace, an impossible stillness after so much horror. I picked up the key and the torch of my flashlight, its beam flickering back to life. I slipped the key into my pocket, no longer a talisman of dread, but a relic of closure. One foot in front of the other, I walked the final steps to the gate. The lock turned easily. The bars swung open as though welcoming me. I paused, hand on the gate, and looked back once. The asylum's silhouette stood stark against the night sky, windows dark and silent. No shadows flitted behind the panes. No whispers trailed on the wind. Lakenheath Asylum had exhaled its last breath, its broken heart finally stilled. Then I stepped through the gate, the cold latch clicking shut behind me. A cold draft guided me down a narrow service passage I'd overlooked in my frantic flight from the courtyard. The walls here were bare concrete, stenciled with peeling hazard symbols and scrawled warnings in cracked black paint. No entry. Authorized personnel only. And finally, sanctum. My flashlight's beam caught the last word, and I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn back, to walk away, and never look behind. But Lakenheath's heart still beat in my bones, demanding one more reckoning. I pressed onward, the corridor sloping downward. The stale air hummed with expectation. Water dripped from an overhead pipe, its echoes cadencing like a slow drum. I rounded a corner, and the passage widened into a domed chamber. Its ceiling arched in ribs of rusted iron. The walls bore alcoves holding uncanny relics. A mill's grindstone stained red. Racks of surgical saws with handles wrapped in peeling leather. Jars filled with cloudy fluids suffused by skeletal remnants. My flashlight trembled as I swept across each alcove, noting the meticulous arrangement that suggested ceremony rather than storage. At the chamber's center stood a raised stone dais, circular and ringed with 8 wrought iron braziers. Each brazier held a half-burned candle made of wax the color of dried blood. In the dais itself, a shallow well held a pool of dark liquid, so viscous it clung to the stone like tar. Around its rim were carvings, a serpent encircling a shattered mirror, 2 clasped hands dissolving into smoke, and at the base, the familiar downward-pointing triangle pierced by a circle. My breath caught. These were the same symbols I'd seen throughout the asylum, bound together, here in a final ritual diagram. I knelt at the dais's edge. The liquid surface rippled as though something stirred beneath. I dared not lean closer, yet. I could not tear my eyes from those swirling depths. Fragments of rhyme floated through my mind, half-remembered phrases from the ritual records. Blood for memory, tears for pain, bind the soul to its domain. The words seemed to seep from the chamber's stones themselves. A sudden click made me snap upright. One of the alcove doors behind me had swung shut. I turned light, skimming the aisles of implements. The room's hush deepened into a cavernous stillness. My heart thundered. I forced myself back to the dais and examined the braziers. Each was etched with a patient name: Eliza Harper, Marcus Reed, Anna, Whitmore, Joseph Bell. The list continued in Dr. Ward's familiar script. These were the vessels I'd shattered their lives, reduced to implements of power. I rose, stepping toward the nearest brazier marked Eliza Harper. I brushed away melted wax to reveal a metal plate beneath, inscribed with a single instruction: offer blood, reclaim memory. My hand hovered over the cold iron. A prickling sensation crept along my skin. I thought of Eliza's whisper in my ear, in the ward of Clara and Henry's soft gratitude. Their memories had been freed. Now I stood at a crossroads: add my own blood to this dark covenant, or find another way. My gaze drifted upward to the domed ceiling. Iron ribs formed a web above the dais, converging at an oculus that looked into the asylum's bowels. Through that small opening, I could see the faint glow of emergency lights from the corridor above. It felt as though the entire structure watched me, its hunger pressing downward. I swallowed, realizing that if I refused this chamber's invitation, Lakenheath might claim me in turn. A soft scraping sounded behind me. I pivoted flashlight beam, settling on the far wall, where a narrow door stood ajar. Beyond lay a slit of blackness that didn't match the concrete's rough texture. I stepped closer, hand on the cold metal. As I did, the pool in the dais churned, sending ripples across the candlelight. The 8 braziers flared, igniting with silent flames that cast leaping shadows across the chamber. The air warmed my breath, steaming in the sudden heat. A voice low and resonant whispered from the oculus, "Offer the final sacrament." The tone was neither male nor female, but a composite of every patient's pleas I had heard. It suffused the chamber like incense. My chest tightened. I realized then that the ritual here was incomplete. The crystal had liberated the memories, the basin in the phantom wing had shattered the heart, and the urn in the courtyard had closed the covenant. But this sanctum remained a tomb of unspoken anguish. I turned back to the dais. Fingering the pendant's chain in my pocket, I retrieved it and held it over the pool. Its glow pulsed once, twice in time with the brazier's flames. I glanced at the brazier inscribed Dr. Elgin Ward. It lay empty. Wax melted to a grotesque pool beneath his name. Next to it, the brazier for Subject 149 burned down to its stub, the plate beneath half buried in crumbs of red wax. I knelt again and placed the pendant in the Elgin Ward brazier, letting the chain coil around the base. The flames flickered violently, then steadied, bathing the pendant in scarlet light. The pool rippled toward me. I cradled my left palm into a fist, digging my thumbnail into the skin until blood welled. The brazier at Eliza Harper hissed. Without thinking, I pricked my finger again, letting drops of bright red fall onto the pendant and drip into the molten wax. A hum thrummed through the chamber. The iron ribs overhead resonated, sending tremors down my spine. Each brazier flared the flames, elongating into dancing tongues that licked the chamber's stone. The pool boiled, then stilled. The shimmer on the pendant dimmed, as though absorbing the last of my offering. Silence crashed around me. The braziers returned to their half-burned states. I stood, chest-heaving, hands trembling. The doorway behind me shuddered, then swung fully open with a creak. Moonlight spilled into the sanctum from the corridor above. Through that slit, I saw the asylum's front hall empty and silent, a world waiting for dawn. The voice whispered again, "Rite complete." It was softer now, suffused with relief. The pendant's glow faded to a gentle pulse. The symbols around the dais's rim shone faintly before dimming, their power spent. In the pool, the dark liquid receded, leaving only clear water rippling in candlelight. I stepped away from the dais, wiping blood from my fingertips on my jeans. The alcove doors swung open on their own, revealing empty shelves where relics had stood. The rusted implements, the jars, the saws, all had vanished, carried away by the ritual's completion. The chamber felt hollow, cleansed of its foul purpose. At the doorway, I paused and looked back at the sanctum one last time. The braziers stood like silent sentinels, their candle stubs cold. The pool's water lapped quietly against stone. Dr. Ward's brazier, the last vessel, lay empty, his name erased as though he had never been. My blood on the pendant had sealed the final rupture in his design. I climbed the short flight of steps to the corridor above, and as my foot crossed the threshold, the door swung shut behind me. The warning stencils peeled from the wall, sanctum crumbled to dust. The corridor lay calm, its walls restored to bare concrete, the emergency lights blinking in indifferent rhythm. I straightened, brushing myself off. The night beyond Lakenheath's walls waited still, but I felt changed, my blood bound to the asylum's memory, but also to its redemption. I slipped the pendant back into my pocket and raised my flashlight. The final chamber's echoes lingered at my back, but before me stretched the path to liberation. I exhaled and moved forward, each step lighter than before. The air hummed with anticipation as I stepped into the asylum's clock tower, the final threshold before freedom. The narrow staircase spiraled upward, each step carved from centuries-old stone, slick with condensation. My flashlight's beam illuminated metal girders and fraying ropes that once drove the great clockwork above. With every footfall, the tower exhaled a low mechanical groan, as though resentful of my intrusion. At the top, a heavy hatch led into the clock room, where time itself had become the asylum's tortured heartbeat. I heaved the hatch open and climbed into the chamber. The great clock face glowed in the moonlit sky. Beyond its domed glass, the minute hand frozen at 11:59. Gears the size of wagon wheels interlocked in a gleaming tangle of iron, their teeth caked with rust and old oil. Shadows pooled in every crevice, and the air smelled of ozone and aged metal. I swallowed hard, chest tight, and stepped onto the catwalk, circling the mechanism. Here above, everything I had endured, the sealed wards' horrors, the portrait room's haunted eyes, the chapel's fractured faith. I faced the asylum's malignant core, the very machinery that measured each tortured minute and bound Dr. Ward's lingering will to this place. The crystal heart I'd placed in the subterranean dais had shattered his power over the souls below, but time here still pulsed with cruel intent. I could feel it in my bones until the clock struck midnight again. I remained tethered to Lakenheath's cruel chronicle. I approached the central gearbox, my steps echoing. The gears, once silent, now trembled as though awakened by my presence. A faint scratching noise whispered from within the mechanism. I peered closer and saw something shimmering beneath an iron cap, a lock engraved with the serpent and moon motif. My key, the same discarded talisman, still lay warm in my pocket. I drew it out, its metal cold and familiar, and slid it into the lock. The gears paused mid-turn, as though time itself hesitated. With a decisive click, the lock yielded. Sparks of energy flickered along the gear train, and the entire chamber stilled. The clock's hands began to twitch, first the second hand, then the minute hand jerking toward midnight. I gripped the railing, heart pounding. The chorus of distant whispers, the same voices I'd freed, rose in urgent crescendo, carried through the walls and rattling the bricks. They cried warnings. Stop the clock. Don't let him return. I set my flashlight down and reached to the adjacent control lever, its handle worn smooth by countless operators long gone. The asylum's head doctor had used this lever to orchestrate midnight's ritual, the final binding of memories into the asylum's marrow. If I could override it, I could save this place from a new cycle of torment. My fingers brushed the lever's cold iron, and with every ounce of will, I yanked it downward. The mechanism resisted groaning, then yielded with a shudder. The gears reversed, grinding in protest. A blast of stale air surged through the chamber as ancient vents unseated themselves. The clock hands began to rotate backward, the minute hand spinning furiously away from midnight. Time itself seemed to recoil. Then reality shuddered. The glass of the clock face cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and moonlight fractured into jagged beams. The voices outside coalesced into a single roar. He returns, he returns. A cold figure materialized on the catwalk opposite me, pale towering limbs draped in coils of shadow. Dr. Elgin Ward himself, his coat tattered, his eyes blazing that same cruel gray light. Behind him, the hour hand quivered at the threshold of 12. I staggered back. "You won't have it," I shouted, voice cracking. Ward's grin widened, revealing teeth as brittle as broken gears. He raised a skeletal hand. The gears stuttered, then flipped forward, again pushing the clock inexorably toward midnight. Each tick resonated like a gunshot in the confined space. I lunged for the lever, but Ward's hand brushed against it, halting its movement. He stepped closer, mist curling around his form. "You cannot stop time, my friend," he whispered, voice a rustle of dying leaves. "Time is my creation. It binds their memories, and soon it will bind you." I felt panic surge. Behind Ward, the chamber walls rippled, revealing flickers of other times' patients screaming beneath shocked electrodes. Twins chanting from the portrait room, the chapel pulsing with dissonant hymns. The asylum's darkest moments shivered into view, then vanished. Memory and time collapsed together, choking the air. Ward advanced, and the clock struck its first chime, one echoing note stretched impossibly long. The gears jerked forward again. I braced against the railing chest, heaving. In my hand, the key vibrated, humming with the combined resonance of every freed soul. I yanked it free and flung it with all my strength toward the central gearbox. The key struck metal with a resonant clang, embedding itself into the heart of the machine. Sparks flared, and the gears convulsed. Ward recoiled, face contorted. The second chime rang 2 tolls, then the third. I seized the lever again, yanking it downward with feral force. The clock's movement reversed once more, grinding backward against its own design. Ward screamed a hollow shriek that reverberated through steel and stone, his form unraveled, shadow threads unspooling. The voices outside reached a crescendo of triumph. "Time is broken. You are free." The gears ground slower, then stilled. The clock hands froze at 11:58. An eternal minute suspended between terror and liberation. A final chime rang, not from the clock, but from deep within the asylum's foundations, a sound of release. The great glass panes of the clock face shattered inward, and shards rained down, clinking across the catwalk. Moonlight flooded the chamber, illuminating the wreckage of Ward's silhouette. Now, nothing more than a tattered coat and a smear of shadow that dissolved in the light. Silence fell so profound that my own breathing felt like thunder. The gears hung motionless. Time itself paused. I sank to the floor, trembling, as the voices, once clamorous, whispered gentle farewells. "Thank you. You saved us." At last we rest. Their voices faded into nothing. I crawled to the broken clock face and pressed my palm to the glass. A cool wind blew through the opening, carrying the scent of dawn. The shard-littered floor reflected my face, tired, haunted, yet alight with relief. I rose unsteadily, heart still pounding, and made my way back down the spiral stair. Outside the tower, the asylum lay silent beneath the moon. No flicker of lamplight shone in its windows. No echo of madness trembled in its halls. I crossed the courtyard toward the open gates. As I went, the asylum seemed to exhale. For the last time, a giant drawing in air it no longer needed. I paused at the gate, hand on the iron bar. Midnight would come again, but this time it would mark peace, not horror. I pushed open the gate and stepped into the cool, pre-dawn air. The world felt sharp alive, unbound by Lakenheath's broken time. Behind me, the asylum's silhouette vanished into the mist. I exhaled, letting the tension slip from my shoulders. Time had been unmade and remade, and with it, the asylum's malevolent will. I walked away every step, carrying me toward a future no longer haunted by Lakenheath's final toll. The dawn light filtered through the remnants of the wrought iron gate as I stepped onto the overgrown path leading away from Lakenheath Asylum. My legs rattled with the memory of that final ascent through the clock tower, my lungs still tasting of rusted gears and stale air. Behind me, the asylum's silhouette loomed stone beast at rest, its windows dark, its heart stilled. Yet in that hush of first light, I sensed no relief, only the echo of every scream, every whisper, every fractured memory I had encountered within those walls. I paused at the courtyard's edge, the path splitting toward the forest and the old carriage road leading back to civilization. My journal lay heavy in my pack pages, brimming with names and symbols and horrors. My penknife and the tarnished key nestled in my pocket like talismans of survival. I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me, carrying the tang of wet earth and promise of renewal. But even as goosebumps rose on my arms, a final doubt gripped me. Had I truly left Lakenheath behind or merely unlocked its deeper secrets? A rustle of branches to my right drew my gaze. A single raven perched on a broken statue, its glass eye missing the marble, cracked at the beak, tilted its head at me. Its feathers glistened wet with dew. I straightened. "Is it over?" I whispered. The raven cawed once low and resonant and beat its wings, lifting into the pale sky before disappearing among the pines. The question lingered in its wake. I took the carriage road, each footstep stirring fallen leaves, and the echo of footsteps long gone. The silence pressed against me, full of absence. No phantom child called my name. No rattling chains pursued me. Yet in the air, I swore I heard a soft sigh, a collective exhale of relief from every corner of the asylum I had traversed. I didn't look back. I refused to give its walls more power over me. Midway along the road, I paused at a weathered milestone, carved with the distance to the nearest town 12 miles. It leaned drunkenly moss, coating its face. I ran a finger along the carved numeral, feeling the cool stone's smoothness beneath mossy roughness. The milestone had borne witness to travelers who'd passed by Lakenheath, their ignorance protecting them from its secrets. I wondered if any of them ever felt the asylum's pull or heard its midnight lament. My pack jarred against my back as I resumed walking. The road arced through tangled underbrush, crossing an old creek where water gurgled over stones worn smooth by centuries. I knelt to cup the water in my palms, letting it drip through my fingers. Cold and alive, it grounded me water that had nothing to do with the stagnant pools beneath Lakenheath, but with the world outside, the world indifferent to human torment. By mid-morning, the forest thinned, and a stretch of farmland unfurled ahead. Green rows of crops rippled in a breeze, unmarred by dread. A solitary farmhouse stood guard smoke, curling from its chimney in lazy spirals. I approached heart-beating with a cautious hope that the living world still kept its promise of sanctuary. I knocked on the rough-hewn door. It creaked open, revealing an elderly woman whose apron was speckled with flour. Her eyes, curious but kind, met mine. "You look like you've walked through a storm," she said softly, voice warm. I managed a shaky smile. "You could say that." She beckoned me inside, and I stepped over the threshold, leaving Lakenheath's path and its ghosts behind me. Inside, the air smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. Light poured through the lace curtains onto a wooden table, set for one. Chairs scraped softly as I sat, legs trembling. The woman offered me a mug of tea, so fragrant it felt like sunlight in a cup. I wrapped my hands around it, relishing the warmth. For the first time since midnight, I allowed myself to breathe without fear. I gazed at the teacups swirling steam and let the memories surface. The sealed ward's dull eye, the children's footprints through walls, the portrait room's pleading eyes, the ritual chamber's brazier, flames the clock tower's halting of time, the final release in the courtyard. Each memory was a tether. I had severed a debt I had repaid, with key and candle and blood. The raven's farewell caw echoed in my mind, a benediction. I drew my journal from my pack and opened it to a blank page at the end. With a steady hand, I wrote a final entry. Lakenheath Asylum, midnight toll broken, memories liberated, heart stilled, the world endures. I closed the journal pen, resting atop its pages. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, a lullaby for the living. As I finished the last sip of tea, the woman smiled and said, "Rest now. You've done well." I nodded, chest still weighted by what I had seen, but buoyed by the knowledge that I would live to tell the tale. Stepping outside, I turned once more toward the road, sunlight gilding the farmhouse roof. No shadow reached from the forest. No whisper trailed between blades of grass. Lakenheath was behind me. Its horrors sealed its souls freed. I set my pack on my shoulder and took the first step toward the horizon, toward home, toward dawn, toward anything but midnight. The horizon blossomed in a soft golden haze as I journeyed away from darkness, each step carrying me farther from Lakenheath's shadow. The world awakened around me, the distant hum of farm machinery birds conversing in gentle choruses, and the clean tang of morning dew beneath my boots. My heart, once hammered by fear and sorrow, now settled into a steady rhythm, each beat a quiet affirmation that I had survived, and that the asylum's captive spirits could finally rest. I paused beside a field of wildflowers bending beneath the dawn breeze, and closed my eyes, letting the petals' sweet fragrance fill my senses. In that serene stillness, I felt the weight of every memory release, the child's plea, the nurse's sorrow, the doctor's ambition, and realized they now drifted like seeds scattered to the wind, carried into realms beyond suffering. A single petal drifted past my cheek, soft against my skin, and I tilted my head to watch it float toward the sunlit sky. The road ahead wound through rolling hills, promising new landscapes and fresh beginnings. I drew a deep, unhurried breath, tasting freedom's clarity. The ordeal had left me changed. My dreams would bear faint echoes of midnight corridors and spectral voices, but they would also carry the resilience born of facing the darkness and prevailing. With the farmhouse receding behind me and the open road unfurling before I lifted my gaze to the morning sky, soft clouds drifted across pale blue, and the sun blossomed in warmth and light. It whispered of possibility, of unburdened hours and peaceful days. I smiled, feeling the last tremors of fear dissolve into this day's gentle promise. Now, every rustle of leaves and distant bird call felt like a quiet reassurance the world endures beyond nightmares. Beauty persists beyond horror, and peace follows even the darkest midnight. My steps fell easy, guided by the sun's slow climb, and a heart unshackled at last. Good night to Lakenheath's ghosts, and good morning to the new day. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be calm, your breath steady, and your spirit unafraid as you lie back and relax, carrying this journey's soft echo in your heart tonight.